On this episode of Larry the Golf Guy, we speak with Greg Nathan, who is president and CEO of the National Golf Foundation. We start our conversation with Greg discussing really what was his remarkable journey from having decided, after having been a competitive tennis player as a junior, deciding in his early 20s that he wanted to have a career in golf, and how he reached that goal through really an impressive combination of persistence and some good fortune. After college, where he graduated from Lehigh in the early 90s, he got a series of jobs on Madison Avenue, ultimately joined the SI Golf Group, which had Golf Magazine and Golf.com, and then in 2007 subsequently joined the National Golf Foundation, where he ultimately rose to his present position of being president and CEO. So about half of the podcast is talking about that really remarkable road he pursued, and how he achieved this goal. It's really quite interesting, and I think informative for particularly people, starting out in their careers. We then talk for the back half of the podcast about what the NGF does, how it serves as an umbrella trade organization for really the entire golf industry, and also does some private work, private consulting work, also has a charitable arm. It's really quite an amazing organization, and is really the source for all data in the game. And then the last part of the podcast, we talk about a number of topics, including Greg's view of the current state of the game, the role of non-green grass facilities like a Topgolf and being an on-ramp for new golfers, the relevance of the pro game to growing the game among the public, and then his overall thoughts on the future of the game. So all of that in really quite a fun and engaging conversation with Greg Nathan, President and CEO of the NGF, up next on this edition of Larry the Golf Guy. Well, welcome to another edition of Larry the Golf Guy, and I'm really pleased today to welcome to the podcast Greg Nathan, who is President and CEO of the National Golf Foundation. Greg, thank you so much for making time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Larry. It's great to be on with you.
So, as I often like to do for our listeners, just to give a little context for the guests we have on, just maybe go back a little bit to the beginning. I know you grew up in White Plains, New York. Maybe tell our listeners kind of how and when you were first introduced to this great game.
So, I grew up as a tennis player. I did not grow up in a golf home. In fact, we talk about it in my family that it skipped a generation. So my father's parents, they dabbled in some golf out in Los Angeles, and were members of Hillcrest.
Oh, right around
Uh,
the corner. Yeah.
and they're of the age that they were at Hillcrest with like George Burns
Yeah.
and people like that,
Sure.
back in the day.
Yeah.
Um, but it skipped a generation. I actually hit balls for the first time in a schoolyard, North Street School, where I attended fourth grade, which was about 60 yards from my front door in White Plains. And I used to go over to my friend Steve Monteverdi's house, uh, which was on the other side, like triangulating North Street School. And I would go to his house and we'd play video games, and I'd see his father's golf clubs. And I was attracted to them. I couldn't help but pick them up and handle these golf clubs. And I knew uh, I was a competitive tennis player. I became a club tennis pro
Oh,
when
wow.
I was
Okay.
18, 19. I was a club
Wow.
tennis pro at Waikigill in
Yeah.
New Rochelle.
Yeah, sure. I know it. Yeah, absolutely.
Great club.
A
And
great
then
club.
I was a tennis pro at Brayburn in Purchase, New York.
Yes. Yes.
But you know, I would go and hit balls in the schoolyard, fifth grade through, 12th grade, while I was playing competitive tennis. And I learned how to play from reading Golf Magazine and Golf Digest.
Wow. Interesting.
And the fact that Larry, I have wonderful, I call them adult relationships. I have wonderful adult relationships with George Pepper,
Yeah.
you know, longtime editor of Golf Magazine,
Right.
and with Jerry Tardy,
Yeah.
still chairman of Golf Digest. And I mean, I just saw Jerry Tardy on Monday in New Jersey, and I have to stop myself every time I see them from telling them how grateful I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny. I mean, I used to just devour those magazines. My father, I mean, I had my dad introduce me, but Golf Digest, I literally been a subscriber, first with my dad and me for since 1970, so 50 plus years. And yeah, I mean, Nick Seitz, going back to all the different people that were there, for Jerry. Great. That's very cool that's how you got involved. And lots of great courses. You were just on the tennis side of it. Lots of great clubs, I should say, right where you grew up. You mentioned a few of them. I mean, the Century Club. I mean, go through lots of different places in where you were.
Yeah, my
So
my
yeah,
my uncle Alfred was a member of the Century Club, and I have really wonderful early memories of going
I
to
bet.
Century with Alfred and being like, oh, so this is what really serious golf is like. And total aside,
Yeah.
but Al Feynman, Alfred, his regular Saturday game at Century for many years included, the former head of the Federal Reserve,
Really?
Mr. Irrational Exuberance
Mr.
himself.
Greenspan. Yeah, Mr. Greenspan.
Yeah, so Alan Greenspan was in his regular Saturday game,
Wow.
along with a very significant New York real estate developer named Fred Rose, and they could talk about how they were going to carve up the world, I guess, while they were lining up a 6-footer.
I love it. Very, very cool. So you went on from there, you went to Lehigh, majored in economics. I know from reading that at some point early on, maybe early 20s, you kind of seemed to get focused on the golf was going to be something you wanted to sort of spend your life on. From someone who grew up as a competitive tennis player, kind of got a little interested in golf. I mean, how did you get from that to sort of at a relatively young age, knowing that golf is where you wanted to make your career?
So Lehigh has a role in this, which
Okay.
is, I was not recruited to play tennis at Lehigh, but I was interested. So I tried to walk on, and I participated in a tryout at Lehigh, and I couldn't really get a look from the coach. And this is very soon after I arrived, I did this tryout freshman year, and coincidentally, the biggest intramural tennis tournament that I think included faculty and
Oh, wow.
students. I think there were 150 players in this Lehigh singles tournament, and I won the tournament. And I wasn't a big singles player. I played first doubles, um, but I won the tournament. And I said, okay, this is my call to go back to the coach and give like one last chance and say, I just won this tournament. Can I get a look? And the answer was definitely no. And that really is a very key moment, Larry, that I decided, you know what? Enough with tennis. I've done my 10,000 hours. I had
Right,
two
right.
great tennis pro jobs, and I'm going all in on golf. And the reading of the religious reading that I did about golf. reading Golf Digest, reading Golf Magazine, reading Golf Week, reading Golf World, everything that I could get my hands on is exactly the formula. Being looking at young people today who occasionally I'm in a position to give counsel to.
Right.
This is where it all ties together. I'm like, you need to look for an industry where you have become an expert, or you could become an expert in that industry for free. Okay, what subject matter would you read absolutely everything and study it to become a subject matter expert just because you love it? Now, some people could do it because they have an objective in mind of wanting to work in that industry, but I just think it's a much easier thing to do
I
if it's
agree.
like I say to young people, what have you become an expert in for free without being paid, or what would you? And and that's sort of the place that I was in my early 20s, where I had read enough that I knew that golf had this particular depth of all these different things, inexhaustible things that you could get into, whether it's the history of the professional game, instruction, golf course architecture, golf's role in society, golf media. There's just in any one of those categories, you could go as deep as you possibly wanted and never fill it up,
Right.
never fill
Right.
up the bucket.
Right.
And I've always been attracted to things like that. Uh, Things where you could go really deep if you wanted to. And if it was something that you cared about enough, and I had gotten to that point where I cared enough about golf, I was like, I want to be involved in this business. I just was so attracted to it. And I know what a gift that was. So
Yeah.
at 23 years old, to be laser focused, I really wanted to work in golf. It didn't help me get my first job in golf for many years.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about that because I know, or I gather from what I've seen, you sort of started in advertising communications. So just to give people the timeline, you graduated, I think, in 91 from Lehigh. And so for, I don't know, next 8 or 9 years, you're sort of in these different positions that aren't specifically golf related. I mean, they're in media generally, advertising communications. Talk to me about that and sort of like you were laser focused, but you weren't able to go right into it. So, I mean, was there a plan here that you're sort of saying these are going to be my stepping stones? I mean, ultimately, I think in 2000 you ended up working for, the SI Golf Group, which of course includes Golf Magazine, golf.com back then, and I was also a longtime SI subscriber in addition to Golf and Golf Magazine. I remember Shipnuck Bamberger would write stuff for, that great golf, SI Golf Plus edition. So you ended up there, I think, in 2000. But kind of how did you get there? Was that kind of a plan or was it fortune? Kind of how did that all work out?
Larry, it's one of the best stories, and I'll have to give you the short version.
Okay.
But the first big reveal is that I'm a Deadhead. Okay,
Okay.
I went to over 100 Grateful Dead shows while Jerry Garcia was alive, and in the fall of 1991, in September of 1991, I saw 15 Grateful Dead shows in 20 days. Like,
Wow. Wow.
okay, nine shows at Madison Square Garden, followed by 6 shows at Boston Garden. And it was an incredible experience. And I came home to White Plains after that. And I was sitting in the den at my house, and my mother came in and she said, do you think it's time for you to get a job? And I said, "Y- perhaps differently than most 22-year-olds at that moment, I actually said, yeah, I guess so. That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that." And yes, I got a great education at Lehigh. Uh, but more importantly, I grew up with a father who was an incredibly successful copywriter and creative director on Madison Avenue,
Ah, okay.
who moved with my mother, drove 3,000 miles from Los Angeles to New York because he knew that he wanted to work in advertising, that it was his calling to work on Madison Avenue. Drove across the country without knowing anyone or having a single connection,
Wow.
and ended up being, winning every award that you could win. Okay.
Wow. Awesome.
Incredibly successful copywriter and creative director during the golden age of advertising in New York City, which for reference is the half generation after Mad Men.
I was just going to say it's right after, right? Because Mad Men's like early 60s and stuff, but so
Yeah,
it's a little
it's
later than.
not a suit and tie environment. It is for account people, but you would rarely see, like Don Draper wore a suit to work every day. Like my
Right, right.
father was not doing that.
Yeah.
It was a slightly different. So I used to love going to my father's office when I was a kid, and I would go to the office in New York, and we'd walk to. I'd get to meet all the people and see what the environment was like. And I always thought it was an amazing environment with great high energy, great looking people who seemed like they
Sure.
liked who they like that they liked each other. And we would go to I'd go see him at work and we'd go to Ranger game,
Yeah.
or go to a sporting event or go do something. And so when I had this conversation with my mother, I was like, okay, this is where I'm going to go first. Is I'm going to go to the ad agency business. And honestly, I looked in the New York Times help wanted ads that Sunday, and I came across like three headhunters, and I had a job within a couple weeks at one of the agencies where my dad previously worked, where I had physically been in the office,
That's cool. Yeah.
called Ammirati and Puris. And Ammirati and Puris, um, was an incredible agency. And while I was there, it won National Agency of the Year. So it was a perfect building block to a professional business future. Roughly 300 to 400 employees, big enough to have all the disciplines um, and the processes, but small enough to not be a huge corporate machine.
Yeah.
And it's such a benefit that I got to see right off the bat. My first job was seeing a great company from the inside and how it operated. And so when I was an incredibly powerful and influential assistant account executive, making 18,000 bucks a year plus overtime, um, one of the accounts that I managed was Cellular One, the precursor of AT&T Wireless.
Right.
And this guy named John, he represented the US Open tennis program, the magazine for the US
Yeah.
Open tennis,
Yeah.
which was owned by Tennis Magazine, which was owned by the New York Times.
Right.
And this guy, John, called on me and said, "Hey, I'd really doing his job. I'd really like to have Cellular One support this magazine." And I said, John, I'm going to use my incredible influence to try and help make this buy happen. But let me tell you confidentially, what I'm really interested in is I know that the New York Times, who owns what you're doing, also owns Golf Digest and Golf World.
Right.
and I'd really like to work in golf. And if you hear about anything, I'd really like to know about it. And what I didn't know in my youth and inexperience, Larry, was that because he wanted to sell me that ad, he actually was going to go do something to help me. Like it never occurred to me that he was actually going to do something. And John called me, I don't know, maybe it might have been 60 days later, but he called me and said, I'd like you to come out to Siwanoy Golf Club in Bronxville, which hosted the first PGA Championship,
Right,
I think,
right.
in
1916.
1916.
Yeah, 1916. Absolutely.
Won by Jim Barnes, maybe.
Yeah, Long Jim Barnes. Absolutely.
Okay. And the other two people in the group, so John was in the group, a guy named Dan was in the group, and a guy named Hugh White, who ran all the research for the Golf Digest companies. And at some point during that round of golf, the guy named Dan says, look, if you want to get in the golf business, you need to go to the PGA show. That would be a great place for you to build a network. And the next one, it's like 1995, 1996, was in Anaheim. It's the last time that any PGA shows in Anaheim. And he says, if you go, I will give you a Golf Digest badge and I'll badge you in. We'll have a chat. I'll introduce you to one or two people, and then you're going to have to give me the badge back. And that's what happened. I took vacation days from my ad agency job. I got my best suit. I got some resumes together. I paid for the air travel. I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express and got extra smart. And and Dan would meet me. And I did this, and I would not say that I wasn't really a confident individual. It made me understand what motivation really is. Because I would sit down, I would go into the show and I would look for the book. There's no internet back then. There's a
Right,
book
right, of
about this
course. Right.
thick.
Yeah.
And there's also no privacy back then. Okay.
Right.
It lists all the officers of every company. All right. And I would walk up to a booth and I would I'd see the book on the counter and I'd say, hey, look at that bird. Do you see that bird over there? And they'd look at the bird and I'd grab the book and I would disappear because without the badge, I couldn't get the book.
Right, 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 right.
So I would go and sit down with the book. I can't tell you, Larry, how out of character this is, okay, for this period of time. But I was so motivated. I would sit there with the book and I would look at all the golf companies that I cared about working for. And I'd write down the name of the company. I'd write down the name of the president and the marketing director and what the booth number was. And I would spend the next 2 days, like physically in person, stalking names on badges and figure out some comfortable way to approach them.
Wow. Wow.
And there's still a handful of people who I met at that first show who I still talk to.
Wow.
There's a guy named Brian Fortini, recently retired, a long time equipment ad sales guy for Golf Magazine and SI. I remember meeting him at that first show, and there's a handful of people who are kind enough. And that experience alone, the golf business is one of the more genuine businesses in the world.
Yeah.
Because of this game. And that experience further reinforced. Look, not everybody wanted to talk to me. They're not there to talk to me. Okay. But here's where this all ties together in a really insane way. Is that 6 years later, 5 years later, after going to show after show after show, Dan meeting me consistently at all of these shows and helping me get in, I had built up a meaningful network of people that I knew where when the opportunity at Golf Magazine finally came around, I actually could bring some relationship value to them,
Got it.
in
Yeah.
addition to skills and
Right.
talents and
Right.
experiences. And I had told one of the people, a guy who worked with me at Ammirati and Puris, who years earlier left to take a job at Golf Magazine, who I would meet every year at the PGA show. And I'd say, Pete, if you ever leave that job, I really want to know about it. And as it turns out, Larry, I was interviewing, this is several ad agencies later, but I was interviewing for a partner position, the equivalent of VP position at Ogilvy and Mather. And I was on like interview number 3 or 4. We were talking about money, and I got the call from Pete. And Pete said, I'm leaving Golf Magazine to go work for Zenith Media. And basically, it's the equivalent of me looking across the table at this guy. His name's Michael Baldwin. And I said, Michael, I'm so appreciative of this opportunity at Ogilvy, but I just got the call and I got to go pursue. This is something I've been pursuing for, 10 years. Good luck. Go find, you're going to have to go find somebody else. And literally, Larry, within 2 weeks, I had the job
Wow.
at Golf Magazine. And when they walked me to my cubicle the first day, it's a cubicle on Park Avenue. At the end of that cubicle is like a fishbowl office, a window facing out. And in that fishbowl office is George Pepper.
Famously editor
And
of
I was
Golf Mag.
like, I've made it.
Yeah.
Like here's the guy who taught me the game.
Right.
Is
Because
right
of all the
there.
reading. Right. Right.
And so the end of this one arc of my ridiculous story that I'm very grateful for, like these multiple stories of how I ended up
This
here,
is so interesting. Yeah.
is within 6 months of me arriving at Golf Magazine, um, it got sold. Okay, so it originally was owned by the Tribune Corporation in Chicago, and then it was getting sold to Time Inc. And it became part of a division called Time for Media. And they cleaned house. So every person that was involved in me getting hired
Oh
at
boy.
Golf Magazine was out.
Wow.
Including, I mean, George Pepper didn't have anything to do with me getting hired, but he was out too. And so they cleaned house and they brought in new people and they brought in a new publisher. And this new publisher made his first 2 hires. Well, those first 2 hires were the associate publisher, who was John from the original story.
Oh
He's the
wow.
tennis magazine
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
so that's John Donnelly,
Yeah.
JD. JD has been the head of like endemic ad sales for Golf Channel for 20 years. Still a great friend of mine. So John gets hired
Amazing.
as the associate publisher.
Yeah.
Well, guess who gets hired as the ad director? Dan.
Wow.
And that's Dan Robertson. Dan Robertson ends up, he ends up being the publisher of Golf Digest at one point.
Right.
So that's how it all went down. These 2 guys, John and Dan, who have such an instrumental role in sort of this crazy thing I did, going to PGA shows, and
Right. Right.
that's how I developed a network of people and met people. And then JD and Dan, who played golf in that round at Siwanoy, 5, 6 years later, end up being the 2 guys who walk through the door. And we really, I mean, I know how much I enjoy seeing them today, knowing how our careers have have evolved since then, and that history is just incredibly meaningful.
What a story. That's unbelievable the way that all sort of came together. So you're there for a few years and as I mentioned, I mean it was Golf Magazine, golf.com, SI's Golf Plus edition, a lot of different material. It's kind of interesting to, as I think about it, sort of where the whole media landscape's gone. Of course, it's a whole different topic because you were there when Golf Magazine and Golf Digest were these thick things every month. And of course, now we've got folks like Solomon at No Laying Up and Andy Johnson at Fried Egg, and
Totally.
it's a totally different media thing. That's a whole topic in itself. But just to sort of continue with you, I mean, so you end up getting the opportunity and going to the National Golf Foundation in 2007, where obviously you've been since then. And that, of course, has a long history. I lived in Chicago for a while. Chicago has a tremendous golf history.
Yeah.
The best public golf courses, I would argue, in the country, with due respect to San Diego and a few other places that would argue for that crown. And great, wonderful private courses, just a great, not the longest season, but a lot of golf passion there. And of course, Herb and Joe Graffis, were the kind of founders, journalists from, I think Herb was at the Sun Times maybe, but I mean, long history, I guess is what I'm trying to say for NGF back to 1936 as a C6 trade association. But maybe talk to us sort of how did the NGF opportunity come about? And now, as we sit here 18 years later from where you started to running the place, kind of maybe talk about what that journey's been like for you.
So that's the other crazy arc story. And if the people that really would benefit from listening to this interview are young people.
Absolutely.
Okay, in terms of like
Absolutely.
it's just crazy how things happen, and no matter how much you try and prepare for certain things, it's just mind-boggling the things that alter someone's trajectory.
Absolutely.
And so this story has to do with it starts with a guy named Andy Allen, and he's a very close friend of mine to this day. So when I was at Golf Magazine working for this publisher and the Dan and John, I had the responsibility. I was the guy who they would say, "Oh, I need some good news about the golf industry. I'm going to a sales call." And there's a lot of public bad media about golf. I got to tell a good story about what's going on. Can you put together some data for me? And so I was the guy who had the relationship with the NGF and would call and try and put together that type of story for the publisher or ad salespeople. So Andy and I developed this relationship. Once again, the PGA show, we would see each other there. And eventually Andy called me one day and said, I'm moving out of Jupiter. I'm moving to Winston-Salem, where I'm from, where I grew up. And you're going to have new people to work with. And this is in late 2006. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? I'm grown up enough now that I could reach out to this Joe Bettis guy. Like I'd been reading Joe's stuff for years. It
Yeah.
was always his picture, even though, Jim Cass and so many others had contributed to the NGF's content. Bettis was there. Bettis has been at the NGF since 1984, CEO since 1989, inseparable from the National Golf Foundation. So when Andy Allen told me he was leaving, I'm like, okay, I think I'm grown up enough now that Bettis will take a call from me and I'll meet this character. And so I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, I'd love to meet you. I've been reading your material for years. And how about we get together at the PGA show? He says, of course, absolutely. Golf Magazine is a longtime supporter of the NGF. of course, he wouldn't hesitate to do that. So we set up this breakfast on the Wednesday of PGA show in 2007. And we had never met in person. We sit down and we talk for an hour and a half. And over the
Wow.
course of this hour and a half in the Rosen Center Hotel, it's tons of people walking up to talk to him, people walking up to talk to me. We stand up, we have these conversations. In some cases, we both know the person, and in some cases, only one does, but we introduce each other. And it created this environment. It's inadvertently showing evidence
Right.
of your network.
Right. You're giving you
Okay.
credibility. Right. Yeah.
And at the same time, like just as you'd expect, Larry, when the people would walk away, we would talk about their company.
Sure.
Okay, we talk about their company, we would talk about them, and it created this environment where we could state our opinions and talk about the business in very particular ways. And because, Joe's a brilliant man and I have a strategic, highly analytical way of thinking, it was a perfect way for him to get to know me and me to get to know him. And so after an hour and a half, he looks across the booth and he says, Greg, I've created this position. I'm searching to fill, someone to run and grow our consulting business. The NGF is more than the nonprofit trade association. We actually
Right.
do some private work, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
He's telling me. And I really didn't know anything about, just like most people in the industry,
Right.
unless I've talked to them
Talk to them.
in the past 18 years, which is a ridiculous number of people. If you've read some of my stuff, I go with I'm like 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I can name that tune in 3 notes. Like pretty much, if you want to, it's just the nature of where the NGF sits in the industry. Is like,
right.
I mean, if not the most, I'm among the single most well networked people in golf.
Yeah, for sure.
So Joe says I'm looking to fill this position. I've retained a search firm, Jim King out of Providence, Rhode Island, and he says I've got 2 finalists for the position. But if you know somebody, Greg, who might be interested in this position, I'd like to hear about it. And that's just Joe's way. Knowing Joe as long as I've known him, that's exactly the way that he would present. Look, I wasn't an idiot. I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. And I knew what he was saying, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So we did the PGA show. We get up from the breakfast. I go home to Irvington, New York. I remember this conversation like it was yesterday. And I told my wife, Allison, about the breakfast. And I said, there's no way I'm moving to Florida to work for these research geeks. That was my brilliant conclusion, Larry, about the breakfast. And it's a very important thing to have happen in my life because being the president CEO of the NGF, I never take for granted that anyone knows what the heck it is that we do. Because I suffered. I almost made the biggest mistake of my life because I came to that conclusion based on what I knew. And I didn't know squat, clearly. So what the kismet, I don't get to use that word. I don't get to use that word every day. But the kismet of all of this is that my wife's parents had a place in Palm Beach Gardens.
Okay.
And
sure.
we would visit every year.
Yeah.
And in February, like pretty soon after the
Yeah,
PGA show.
yeah.
And being the golf crazy lunatic that I am, I always tried to play a new exclusive place that I hadn't played every time I went to visit my in-laws. And I had been doing it long enough that I was up to this place where it's like MacArthur Golf Club.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was the
JD
place I
McCarthy, right?
wanted.
He took over Palm PGA National or whatever they or I'm trying to think. It was the old course. I remember. I know which one you're talking about. Yeah,
So MacArthur's in Hobe Sound,
yeah,
really amazing club, and I'd heard about it but never played there,
yeah.
and I wanted to, and I reached out to a mentor of mine, a guy named John Dunning, and John Dunning, maybe he was 70 at the time of this phone call. But I said, "Hey John, I'm coming down to South Florida. I'd love to play MacArthur. Is there any chance you know somebody there and we could go play there?" And because I had two kids, very young kids, I had to do the worst possible ask, which is to say, "Oh, and by the way, it's got to be on Tuesday, and we got to tee
Right,
off between
right.
10 and 12, or else I won't be able to pull it off." And within 24 hours, I think, 48 hours max, John Dunning calls me back and says, "Yeah, we're all set. Yeah, we're going to play on this particular day." So John and I go out to MacArthur and we're walking down the fairway. And I'm going to say that it is the 11th fairway. And I have a very visual memory. And we're walking down the fairway with caddies and walking step by step next to each other, like in pace. And as we walk off the tee, I'd started telling Dunning about the breakfast with Bettis. And at the end of the thing, I said, it was great to meet him, but I'm not going to pursue it. And as those words exited my mouth, he stopped his walk abruptly and turned, took the quarter turn
Right.
directly towards me and squared off shoulder to shoulder and said, "No, you're going to go." And he actually, exactly what he said. He said, "Joe Bettis is a very smart cookie and you need to go talk to him again." And I must have like physically moved onto my heels. Um, I was so shocked by his reaction, how dramatic it was. And it was irresistible. I was like, "Oh, okay, I give. All right, of course, if you say so, I'm going to do that." And MacArthur happens to be right off US 1 in Hobe Sound. So the drive that I did from Hobe Sound to the apartment where my wife and my kids and I were staying was also on US 1, drives right by the NGF building. And as I'm driving by the NGF building, um, with my flip phone, 2007 happens to be the year of introduction of the iPhone, by the way.
Right.
Is how another way I always remember the year I started at NGF. I picked up my flip phone. I called Joe and I said, "Look, I'm down here visiting my in-laws. I've been thinking fondly about the breakfast, and I'd really like to hear more about the job." He goes, "Well, would you like to play MacArthur tomorrow?" That I'm a member there, and I was like, "This is effing great." Not only am I going to have this conversation with Bettis, I get a second round that my wife is not going to argue with me about,
Right.
and I'll get to play MacArthur twice. I was like, "Fabulous, let's do that." My son, Jack, today, he's 23 years old. In his 23 years of life, he's never been more sick than he got
Oh
that
boy.
that night. He's 6 years old and he throws up all over this apartment that we're staying in. And my wife and I were up all night long. And so I get up in the morning and I call Joe and I'm like, I can't do the golf. But he says, "Don't worry about it. Why don't you come by the office at 3 o'clock?" Say, "Sure." So I come by the office on US 1. He wheels over to his computer. He prints out the job description. It's 3 pages, single space, Larry.
Wow. Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, he hands it to me and I look at it. I'm like, okay, this is going to take some reading. And he says, look, take it into the other room, sit on the couch, take your time. And if you read it and you're still interested when you're done, we'll talk about it. And I take this job description into the other room, and I'm sitting there and reading it, and I'm grinning. I couldn't help it. Like I'm reading this job description, and Joe is a terrific writer, and the NGF is a very peculiar organization. So it takes a lot of detail to explain this job and what we do. And as I'm reading it, I'm like reading things that, of course, I had no idea that the NGF did. Okay, we do, like I can't, as an interesting little quandary, like I can't talk about like the private work that we do, okay, for some of the biggest companies in golf. But I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, they do this for TaylorMade and they do this for Toro and
Right.
they do this for Titleist and this for, the USGA, and it's going down the list. And this is all private work that I had no idea that the NGF was involved with. But this is what this job was to do, was to grow the private work. And I'm reading it and I'm like, I'm a good fit for this job. This is everything I am. But on the other hand, there's things in there, I'm like, and it's everything I want to be that I'm not yet. And I was very excited. And so, of course, at that point, I went back to visit with Joe in the other room and I played it cool. And I was like, yeah, I think this is a really interesting job. And he said, okay, well, when you go home, you're going to get a phone call from the recruiter. You'll do a phone interview. If he likes it, he'll come to New York and he'll meet with you and we'll go from there. And the most difficult part of this process was that this all happened in February. And what I didn't know was that NGF only had 2 board meetings a year, and the spring board meeting was at Augusta, which we don't do it there anymore, but at that time it was at Augusta. And I've skipped a big thing, which is after that meeting, I went home. I went to Golf Magazine. You got to promise not to tell anybody, but I didn't do any work for Golf Magazine for 2 days. Okay. All I did was figure out how I was going to get this job. Okay. How was I going to, what could I do? What could I present to Joe that would be the equivalent of me like stabbing this job in the heart and like dragging it with a spear into my cave, like so nobody else could get it. And so I spent the next 48 hours creating a presentation, a PowerPoint, to try and convince him that I was the right person, case studies and a bunch of other things. And I sent it by FedEx to Joe, and it was in Joe's office within 3 days. Of course, I found out later that made a huge impression on him. Just the urgency and the desire.
Sure. Oh, sure.
that represented. So I did that, and that's in February, and I didn't hear anything until, other than some very minor chit chat by email. I really didn't hear much until the Wednesday of Masters Week in April. And that felt like an eternity.
Sure, I'm sure.
And what I didn't understand was that Joe was going to present his recommendation to the board because this was a big strategic move of hiring. This is a new position,
Right, sure.
hiring someone to run this business. And so I got the call on the Wednesday of Masters Week with the offer, and moved down to Florida June 1st of 2007 with the meaningful risk of carrying two mortgages.
Wow.
Like I hadn't sold, we hadn't sold our house in Westchester,
Wow.
and it was just on the onset of the recession.
I was going to say, I totally remember this time. Yeah, exactly.
And so I carried two mortgages for 14 months in the early stages of me being at the NGF.
Boy, yeah, because 2008 is when the shit hit the fan.
So fortunately, we sold it. We just compromised on price, thank
Get it out. Yeah,
goodness, to
absolutely.
sell it.
Wise
Otherwise,
move.
it might
Yeah.
have gone another year.
Yeah, that's a wise move.
So
But
anyway, that's how I got to the NGF, and not if not for John Dunning, who knows what would have happened if he hadn't stopped me. And you know, 18 years later, and I tell you, Joe Bettis, this is also for like young people out there. Joe Bettis was getting how he found the NGF is he was getting his PhD at Florida State, and he saw like a bulletin board with a job, like a piece of a flyer that said, National Golf Foundation Research Director. And I think it had like those little cut off tabs with a phone number on it.
oh my God, jeez. Yeah,
And he called the number, and he thought to himself, I like golf, and maybe I could do this for a couple of years.
right, right,
And he's the chairman of the NGF, executive chairman of the NGF right now. He's been here 42 years.
right.
So like for the kids out there,
No,
young
abs-
people out there listening, it's amazing how things materialize.
well, the persistence and then fortuitousness, right? Kind of a combination of it. But so let me ask you this. I consider myself someone who's fairly knowledgeable about golf. I've played since I've been 9 years old. I definitely had heard of Herb Graffis. I think I've heard of the NGF. I think I may be wrong in this. I thought Herb was connected with the Tommy Armour instruction book, but way back when, because that's one of the ones on my shelf. Anyways,
You're right.
so I mean, I'm sitting here with I'm looking across my home office. I have 200 golf books, including the Tommy Armour book. But I don't really know a lot about what the NGF does. And I just, and I suspect a lot of our listeners are in the same boat as kind of you were alluding to. And I know there's a lot of different pieces. You've been talking about the consulting, reference the consulting, business, which is private. I think you have a C3 entity that's, charitable because the trade association is a C6. But if you had to give an elevator speech or something like that, if you're reading someone, how would you describe to somebody what exactly the NGF does and what its mission is?
Sure. Uh, the NGF in 2025, thanks to the stewardship of a number of people before me, um, is the most trusted and definitive source of state of the industry information on the golf business in America. And we don't really have a counterpart globally. So you could argue that in terms of being independent and objective experts on the golf economy, that's the number one thing that the NGF is. And the way that manifests itself from like a business structure point of view is at our core a 501c6 trade association. We are the trade association for every golf related business, which is a really unique thing. There's other trade associations in golf, and they're all vertical.
Right,
The golf course owners, the
right.
superintendents, PGA of
I know your
America.
your buddy Red Evans. I've had him on the podcast, so from golf
Yep.
course superintendents, there's a lot of them. You're right.
So the NGF, one of the ways that we're particularly unique is that we're the only organization that represents the business of golf in a holistic way. So we work with the leading companies in every vertical. And most people, including myself, when I was at Golf Magazine, all I would have been thinking about is like the sexy stuff that you see advertised on TV on tour broadcasts. Like, okay, that's the clubs and the balls and the
Right,
shoes and the
right, right.
gloves and the apparel and you know all that stuff is wonderful. But the golf business, as we serve it, is not only like golf equipment and clubs and balls and apparel and shoes and gloves, but it's golf cars, it's irrigation equipment, it's retailers, it's software companies that make the POS software for golf courses, it's golf course owners and operators, it's every type of chemical manufacturer that deals with turf maintenance, it's mowing equipment. So there's probably a dozen significant verticals where the 25 full-time employees at NGF are working to provide valued, trend, and data-driven insights on the business that would apply to all of those categories. So that's a 501c6. Then, created by Dr. Bettis in 1989, is National Golf Foundation Consulting, a for-profit, wholly owned subsidiary, which is primarily private research, private consulting, all very strategic, data-driven marketing work. We do $3 million worth of marketing work, direct-to-consumer email, database sales for, if you are a sales director for a golf company who calls on golf courses, NGF produces the definitive database of every golf course in the world. So there's your list of prospects. So all kinds of tools and digital marketing and email marketing and databases to help golf companies understand their markets better, understand their customers and prospects better, do marketing. And so everything that's strategic to help golf companies make better informed decisions or sell stuff. And then the third leg of the stool is the 501c3, which is NGF has always been involved in education. And so that's where the 501c3, we've reactivated the 501c3 to handle our education initiatives that are separate from the consulting business or the trade association. So
Very good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It isn't the easiest thing. That would have to be a very long elevator ride.
No, but you did a great job. That describes it beautifully. I think that makes perfect sense. And I want to sort of take advantage of the fact that you're sitting where you are and have all that data to just maybe get your thoughts on a couple of things. One is, I guess, sitting here, certainly in Southern California, I don't think this was unusual. During the pandemic, we just had an explosion of people, playing golf, kind of the ideal socially distanced sport for a couple of years. I mean, our rounds at Brentwood Country Club, where I'm at, just exploded in terms of the number of rounds. And I saw the same thing at the public facilities and stuff. That's a few years ago in our rearview mirror. I'm just sort of curious. I'm sure you have a good sense of this. Kind of how is that? Have we retained? The game retained those people? Kind of how do you sort of see the growth pattern and whether we've been able to retain those people and just generally kind of the growth pattern for the game, as we sit here in 2025?
Sure. I mean, the game is in a generationally positive place. And when I say the game, and it ends up being more words than you want, but it's really the game and business of golf. Okay. And we're really focused. There are other great organizations that are focused on regulating and governing the game. Okay.
Right, for sure.
And they're clients of ours too. And supporters of
Right.
ours.
Sure.
But from a recreational golf standpoint, I don't think the game has ever been healthier than it is now. The business of golf, the business of recreational golf. COVID, so before COVID, the trajectory of the golf business had already begun to change. It had already gone from sort of being in a little bit of a trough in certain aspects to like 2017, 2018, 2019. Definitely, we're seeing the beginnings of a recovery, an upswing on almost every metric in golf. So COVID deserves credit for being a fantastic catalyst. I mean, what sport or activity in the world wouldn't be delighted to be the only game sort of deemed safe and acceptable
Right.
during the global pandemic? I mean,
Exactly.
but what happened, Larry, is that a lot of people, I mean, I would estimate, and this is not a scientific estimate, there's 50 million lapsed golfers
Right.
walking around somewhere in America. And lapsed is a heavy word. Like, I'm talking about 50 million people who ever played a round of golf who didn't currently play in 2020. Okay, so in 2020, we probably had 23 million, okay, people playing golf, right? I'm telling you, there's another 50 million who had played a round of golf before who aren't counted in that number. And guess what? When golf is the only game in town, the only game that's deemed acceptable, a lot of people rediscovered or discovered for the first time all the intrinsic, wonderful values of golf. And of course, I'm not talking about breaking 90, 80, or 70. We're talking about being outdoors,
Right.
being with friends, or friends that you can make on the golf course, exercise, therapy, everything that's separate from competition or improvement. Now, competition or desire to improve, embracing the challenge, it never left. There's a group of people, it might be 5 million people who like me, who care about that, who are, love to play for a few bucks and always want to try and get better, right?
Right.
But the great majority of people do not play for that. Great majority of golfers do not keep score. They're playing for fun. They're playing for the camaraderie, the exercise, the outdoors, the therapy. And so COVID had that effect of reminding people of all these wonderful things about golf. And if you take that dynamic and you put it in stew with the rise of off-course golf, okay, and I'm not talking about during COVID, like as you come out of COVID and Top Golf and simulator golf are absolutely exploding.
Right.
Tech-enabled driving ranges,
Right.
starting to build. The millions of people who would go and experience golf on those off-course places and social media changed the image of golf in a very meaningful way, in an incredibly positive way, that someone who would be intimidated by golf would go to one of those places and be like, hey, they look like me.
Right.
The level of diversity, more female, younger,
Yeah.
that seeing people being themselves, seeing
Right.
people being their own individuals in a golf environment and on social media, seeing people that are not just what you see on Sunday on a PGA Tour broadcast, not just seeing one color, perfectly dressed, wealthy, incredible conditioned golf courses That's not what golf in America is. It's
Oh,
just
I know.
what
Yeah.
people see on television,
Right.
and it skews what they think. So it's this really wonderful confluence of events, of COVID being a catalyst, social media and how it's affected golf, off course explosive growth, and people seeing more folks who look like them, acting like themselves, not having to pretend to be something else. And I mean, since 2019, golf's total media reach is up 30%. Total participation, including on and off since 2019, up 40%. On-course participation up nearly 20% since 2019. The percentage of females, the percentage of people of color, all high watermarks.
Do you see, and that's a great answer. And I was going to ask you about Top Golf, but just one quick follow-up or as an example of, there's others too of off-course facilities. Do you see those people who've their entry point is like a Top Golf? Do you see them that being an on-ramp to sort of going to actually on the golf course or not? I'm sure you have data on that. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
It does. I mean, we have the good fortune of being able to look at the group of people who play for the first time every year. And that number, it hovers between 3 and 3.5 million. So there's a meaningful number of people play
Yeah, that
golf for the
is. That's a
first time.
lot. Yeah.
We call them never evers. All right. So 3 million plus never evers. And we ask them, like, have you had an off-course experience of this Top Golf simulator, driving range? Have you had an off-course experience? For those that say yes, what's the influence of that Top Golf experience on you stepping on a green grass golf course for the first time? And it's very significant. I mean, it's been growing. I think that number it's at least a third, okay, of the never evers have had an off course experience that they say influenced them playing green grass golf. I think the total percentage of people who play for the first time who've had some of that, it's like 2/3. Like it's become a very significant percent. Now, from a research standpoint, it's incredibly difficult to measure what you can call it conversion. It's very difficult to measure conversion in a linear way. We'd have to talk to the same people
Right, right. You'd have
every
to have
year.
a study. Right, yeah.
And it's somewhat cost prohibitive. We are actually looking at certain ways to go about that. So it's kind of like having circumstantial evidence in a
Right.
court case,
I understood. But yeah.
versus like, the bloody glove or whatever.
Going back a few years. Let me ask you another quick question. The pro game. Obviously a lot's gone on the last few years with Live and the PGA Tour and the divide there and whatever going on with the ratings and it's that's a whole topic in and of itself. But I'm just sort of curious from your standpoint, because you're obviously looking at the whole sport. Does the popularity or success of the pro game, uh, how does that impact, in your view, sort of the more general participation of the public? I mean, everyone talked about the Tiger effect, not just for the PGA Tour,
Yeah.
but for interest in the sport. I mean, he's kind of a once in a lifetime phenomenon. But I'm just sort of curious how you think about that. Do you sort of see that having an impact on participation generally? And if so, kind of how?
I tend to be among the more cynical hey, I'm from New York, so I tend to be a little more cynical. Um, Professional golf is very important on a variety of different levels. You can't have significant recreational golf in any country if you don't have heroes. Okay, so it's very important to have heroes to inspire people to play golf. But the numbers don't lie relative to, unfortunately, we have a dilution. We have a dilution of professional golf. You've got you do have some fantastic events to watch, but no one can argue that you're not seeing all the best players playing
Right.
on the same tournaments all the time.
Right.
And the interest in the professional game suffers as a result.
Exactly. Yeah.
I certainly don't see the recreational game um, suffering as a result. We'll never know if they were all together and the professional product was what we're used to. We'll never know whether our numbers in recreational golf would be even higher. I just think that I always mess up this analogy, Larry, I'm about to make, but it's like, it's kind of like, I might really like singing, okay, or playing guitar. Like I wish I could play guitar like Jerry Garcia and entertain myself. And I have these heroes of music that make me want to sing in the shower or play guitar. Okay, but sometimes it's very separate. I'm really much better off watching those people do their thing. I'm not going to sing unless I really love singing. And golf is the same way. Like when Tiger was at his absolute peak and we reached the high watermark in history of recreational golfers, green grass golfers, 30.6 million. We're not there yet, by the way. Like, even though we're at this generational place, in terms of the pure number of green grass golfers, we're still not there yet.
Where
We're
are
not
we?
at
I'm just curious. If 30.6 was the high watermark, where are we
20,
now?
we're about 28 million in green grass
Okay.
golfers.
Okay.
But we are at the high watermark in history for rounds. So you've got a slightly
That's
lower
interesting.
total
Okay.
number of golfers playing more. But my point in all this is when Tiger was at his peak and we got up to 30.6 million golfers, when that Tiger effect went away and we had the Great Recession, it was primarily the less frequent, less committed players who left the game.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
And many players might try golf because they were inspired by Tiger. But if they don't like the activity, if they don't get hooked on the activity, they're not going to keep playing because Tiger's still great.
Right. Right. Right.
So that in itself, I mean, to me, that's everything you need to know about the connection.
Right.
Like, it inspires people. It definitely brings in more prospects who could get hooked. But in general, recreational golf and professional golf operate independent of each other than some of that inspiration effect.
Makes sense. And I'll get you out of here on this final question. And I know it's a big one, but I just want to kind of look ahead. And kind of you mentioned, we're at a generational point here in the game. But I mean, if you were to sort of go into your crystal ball, 5, 10, 15 years, where do you see the game headed?
So the business of golf, I'll just stick with the business of golf in America, to some degree is dictated, just like any economy. Look how brilliant this comment's going to be, Larry. It's about supply and demand. Okay, just like any economy, it's supply and demand. So right now, if you look at supply and demand in recreational golf, we're at 14,000 facilities, 16,000 courses. we are highly unlikely. We have not grown by, we're not going to grow by more than like 20 or 30 new golf courses in a year because land in the 385, MSAs, major markets in the United States, land is too expensive. The cost to build new golf in those metros is cost prohibitive. So what is being built on the supply side is destination golf primarily.
Right.
Resort, private
Yeah.
club, par threes at resorts,
Right.
and some really special properties that some visionary investors are building with, we're also in like the second era of the golden age of golf course architecture.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
the
agree with
stuff
that.
that's getting built right now,
Phenomenal. Yeah.
it's just magic.
Yeah. I agree with that.
And what the Dokes and Gil Hanses and Corin Crenshaw and this group of others are building is just extraordinary golf environments. But you're not going to have more supply, meaningful amount of supply built where the people are.
Right. Yeah. Sand Hills is kind of far away. I hear you.
And so you've got we're not we're approaching tee sheet capacity. Our measures show that public golf is around 60%. Golf course operators of public courses say, we're about 60% of them would say they're at or near capacity. And that doesn't mean 100%. It means where the product would really suffer
Right.
if it was busier. So about 60% of public say they're at or near capacity, 75 to 80% of private at or near capacity. So you're not gonna, there isn't a ton of room on tee sheets to grow, and you're not going to have a lot of meaningful growth in supply where the people are. So that dynamic would tell you that there is still quite a bit of headroom for people, let's say, who might not have access to green grass golf, to continued growth in off course, continued growth in simulator. The big venue business, of course, is in an interesting transition point right now with, Topgolf either spinning off or for sale. But I don't buy into what Wall Street analysts say about the golf entertainment business. I don't think they look at everything. They're not, they're not necessarily doing their analysis that I see based on the profitability of those locations.
Right.
They're doing it just based on year-over-year metrics.
Right.
Now, of course, you want year-over-year metric growth. But if Chip Brewer, for example,
Right.
and whoever, if they were to sell it, whoever buys it, they're going to invest in it. They're going to do things to make the same store sales grow. And there's still, I think there's still tons of upside in off course. And there are some existing fundamental constraints in growth. That is it that the growth is going to happen in more rural areas? Is it the growth is going to continue to happen in simulator and off course? And there's just going to be, as always, the churn of older people coming out of the game, younger people coming into the game. But I remain quite bullish. There are certainly people out there who look at the cost of golf as being very difficult for people to break in. But at the same time, what I would say is that golf course owners and operators in America have gotten so much more sophisticated.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
On yield management.
Yeah.
And I'm the last person who's going to stand up and say that a golf course owner or operator should take less money. I mean, are you kidding me? It's incredibly difficult business. That's like telling a restaurateur that they should lower their prices so other people can come in the restaurant.
Right.
I mean, they're running a business, and ideally they are creating programs for folks who wouldn't otherwise have access during less busy times. And if capacity starts to decrease, they're in the best position they've ever been to lower prices dynamically, quickly,
Right, right.
to keep the tee sheets full and keep the golf wheel turning. Nothing happens in the golf business if someone doesn't show up and pay a greens fee.
That is true.
The entire business, all those verticals that we talked about,
Right, right.
this is a great place to finish. Herb Graffis, we love this quote of him from him. It is the recreational golfer from whom all blessings flow.
Right. I've seen that. Right. Right.
And
Absolutely.
and that's the truth. This entire business that the NGF looks at, every vertical is supported by people paying a greens fee. And by the way, 75% of golf courses in America are public.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I would just echo all of that. I mean, I do course rating work for the SCGA. As you know, USGA, every course has to get rated for handicap once every 8 years. Southern California is a big land from San Luis Obispo to Mexico, from the ocean to Arizona. And that's one thing you learn is, it's the private courses are a small fraction. That's not what golf is. I mean, we
Right.
go inland all over the place, and I totally hear you. That's where public golf is, and that those tee sheets are pretty full.
And there's plenty
It
of electricians and plumbers
100%.
and people from all walks of life.
Well, and
Uh,
I'm sure you probably know this. I mean, the SCGA, we're kind of one of the forerunners of having non-green grass clubs, as part of the SCGA. So when you look at, the members, people aren't individually, as it goes through clubs for the SCGA and like other allied golf associations, but there's the Firemen of LA. There's all these totally unconnected with green grass facilities that are a big part of who the growth is for the SCGA. So totally
yep.
agree. Hey, Greg, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. It's great and great story about perseverance and fortune in terms of your career and
Thank you.
wish you continued success with everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Larry. I'm where I'm supposed to be. And anybody who's out there in the golf business who, would love some help, we exist to help golf businesses be more successful. And I've gotten to the point where I believe, hopefully it's not my ego talking, but I don't think there's a golf business in the world that I can't help. And it's my life's work to try and do that.
And it's great work and it's great you're doing. Continued success. Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry.